Came in early, still numb from the funeral, determined to catch up on the backlog after 3 days of burying the only man who ever taught me what respect looked like. My father had been the kind of man who fixed his own car, who taught me to tie my tie for my wedding day, who told me to stand up straight when people tried to knock me down. I carried his lessons like armor, but even that couldn't blunt the shock when I opened my laptop and found the email. Just one line from Danica Klein, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who also happened to be my boss. 8 years of marriage, 4 of those side by side in the same office, and she didn't even have the decency to call me in. No warning. No meeting. Just that cold, impersonal line. Clear your desk by the end of the day. HR will handle your exit paperwork. I read it twice, my eyes refusing to accept the words. She didn't even sign it with her name, just the default auto-signature with her title. VP of Operations. Like I was some vendor she'd grown tired of. I sat back in my chair, staring at the Boise skyline as the early light began to spill over the glass towers, streaking the windows with pink and gold. I'd been here before the skyline looked like this, when the tallest building was the bank, not some fancy tech tower. I'd helped build this company's reputation, its systems, its people. I'd stayed late for Danica's deadlines, carried her burdens like they were mine. I'd thought we were building something together, a life, a family, a business. But apparently, burying my father had been poor prioritization. I didn't reply. I didn't storm her office or throw my coffee at the glass wall that separated her from the rest of us. I took a screenshot, saving the email as a record, proof that I hadn't imagined it, proof that this was real. Then I started packing my desk. Each item felt heavier than it should. The mug my father bought me that said, "World's okayest employee," the tiny cactus Jerome had given me after a particularly rough quarter, the photo of me and Danica at the holiday party, grinning like we'd figured it all out. I couldn't bring myself to look at that one for too long. I wrapped it in bubble wrap and placed it in the bottom of the box. Let the past stay buried, just like my father. The office was still quiet. No one else had arrived yet. I liked the silence. It gave me space to breathe. I unplugged my laptop, coiled the charger, and stacked the files I'd been working on. My resignation would probably ripple through the office like a dropped stone in a pond, but I wouldn't be here to see the ripples. That was Danica's mess to clean up. Maybe she'd finally get that promotion she'd been chasing all these years. Maybe she'd find a way to pin my absence on my performance. But I knew the truth. I'd never missed a deadline. I'd never left a client hanging. I'd built teams, not just projects. And the people in this office knew that, even if they didn't say it out loud. I took one last look around my cubicle, the place I'd spent more hours in than my own home. The Boise skyline beyond the window glistened in the sunrise, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like I was looking at a new beginning instead of an ending. My dad would have told me to walk out with my head held high, that no one, not even the person you trusted the most, could define your worth. So I squared my shoulders, lifted the box of my belongings, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed behind me, I felt the weight of every conversation we'd had in that office, every fight, every late night, every hopeful plan. The elevator hummed softly as it descended, carrying me away from the life I thought I knew. I didn't know where I'd land yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I'd find a way to stay steady, just like Dad taught me. Even when the current tried to drag me under. By the time the rest of the team filed in, the sun had climbed a little higher, casting slanted beams across the cubicles and landing right on the half-packed boxes at my feet. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, but I resisted the urge to send another message to Danica. I refused to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much her email had rattled me. Instead, I kept stacking textbooks, notes, and framed photos, each one a testament to nights spent shaping presentations or reworking proposals at her insistence. The hum of the fluorescent lights above was oddly comforting in its consistency, a reminder that some things in this office never changed, even when leadership did. Toby from finance appeared first, rubbing sleep from his eyes and blinking at the sight of me with a box of my personal effects. He wore his usual crisp white shirt and loosened tie, the ink stains on his fingers betraying the hours he spent reconciling budgets. He frowned as he set his coffee down on my empty desk. "Milo, is this for real?" he asked, voice low. I nodded without looking up, sliding a stack of spreadsheets into a folder. I didn't need to remind him that I'd headed up the project that had doubled our Q3 revenue. He already knew, and so did everyone else in this department. Before he could say anything else, Mira from logistics drifted over. She was carrying a to-go box from the cafeteria, her eyes widening when she saw the growing pile of boxes. She set her noodles down, eyes darting to the screen and back to me, confusion etched into her features. Jerome arrived next, earning a whisper of hope in the back rows before he noticed my packed-up state. His face hardened, and he knelt beside the box I'd set on the floor, as if he expected me to pull some kind of joke. But I said nothing, just pointed at the screen where Danica's email glared like an insult. He glanced at the monitor, mouth dropping open for a second before he closed it in a hard line. "Who do I punch?" he muttered under his breath. Jerome was 6'2" with shoulders as broad as a linebacker's and a grin that stopped fights. His loyalty was fierce. He'd been my right-hand guy for 4 years, the one who handled the team's breakdowns and saw me through my father's illness. I gave him a single, measured nod. The message passed in silence. There was no winning a fight with Danica by force. We needed strategy. Word spread like wildfire. My team gathered in a loose semicircle around my cubicle, eyes flicking from my packed boxes to the rest of our now hollowed-out workspace. I could see anger simmering in Toby's jaw, disbelief in Myra's eyes, and a cold, hard resolve in Jerome's stance. They didn't need me to tell them what to do. Loyalty had taken root deeper than any fear Danica might have instilled. They already knew how we built things here. Through long nights, broken deadlines, and late-night pep talks about how this project would mean something to all of us. Then Danica emerged from her office, appearing at the threshold in a designer suit that looked more suited to a boardroom than a startup's war room. She gave me a cool nod, her expression unreadable behind the frosted glass panels. There was something predatory in her gaze, like she was admiring a chess piece she'd just knocked over. I met her eyes only for a moment, then returned to sliding files into a box. My heartbeat steadied. I refused to let her see my pulse race. She didn't linger. She retreated back into her fortress of glass and steel. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Instead of greeting the customary flood of client emails, my inbox remained eerily empty. I could hear whispers across the office, hushed speculation, stifled anger, and a palpable sense of something cracking. I took a deep breath and turned to my team. "They think taking me out'll break the project," I said, voice steady. "But they're wrong. We built the backbone of this operation, and we're not going to just let one email dismantle all we've done." I could feel their eyes on me, something like relief sparking in the silence that followed. By lunchtime, the rumor mill had kicked into overdrive. Email chains about Danica's decision swirled, but no one had concrete details. I watched as toolbars slid across monitors, faces shifting from confusion to anger. My team's loyalty was no longer just to me. It was to the project, to each other, and to the sense of purpose that had bound us through tight deadlines and last-minute reschedules. They weren't running to Danica with questions. They were turning to me, even though I was the reason they were suddenly adrift. Mira shook her head, fiddling with her pens. "She just sent you packing without a conversation?" she asked, tone sharp. I nodded, and she glanced at the screen again, wariness mixing with betrayal. "I thought she respected you." Jerome leaned in, crossing his arms. "Respect doesn't mean shit when there's profit at stake." His words hit like a punch. I remembered every time we'd chosen to work late instead of going home, every time I'd covered for Danica's missteps. I believed she saw me as more than just muscle for her career. I'd been wrong. I set down the final box of my belongings and took off my lanyard, the one with my ID badge that still bore last quarter's MVP sticker. It felt heavier than ever as I unclipped it and dropped it into the box. Every step felt like a surrender, but I refused to let it feel like defeat. My team gathered in close, forming an unofficial huddle that could have been mistaken for a war council. We stared at each other, the unspoken commitment clear in the throttle of silence. We'd been through setbacks together, but this forced separation felt like something else. Something that demanded not retaliation, but reinvention. I met Jerome's eyes, and he nodded. "We need to regroup. We need a new plan." Toby cracked his knuckles and offered a wry smile to Mira. "I'll start reallocating budgets tonight. I know some contacts at Vertex. Harlan might actually listen to us. He's got vision, not just spreadsheets." Myra's tension eased slightly, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I'll back up everything on the server and clean up any loose ends. We can have our data ready to go within hours." Their determination lit a spark under me. "I'll reach out to contacts, set up meetings. We can't let this collapse be the last word." They began to disperse, each with a sense of purpose in their stride. I watched them go, the hum of the office shifting from muted whispers to the click of keyboards and the rustle of papers. Danica had thought firing me would send a message, but she underestimated the roots we'd planted together. When you've spent years fighting rot, you don't respond with fire. You respond with better construction, building structures that stand even when the old framework burns. I took one last look at the cubicle as it stood empty but not quite broken. The half-finished project plans, the sticky notes with reminders of meetings I'd scheduled, the photo of my father grinning at a fishing trip, these things weren't just memories. They were a testament to my work, my integrity, and the bonds we'd forged. I lifted the box and carried it to the elevator, heart steady. I wasn't leaving my team behind. I was leading them somewhere better. As the elevator doors closed, I felt that familiar surge of determination, like I could write the next chapter of my life with the same grit my father had taught me. I glanced at the email one last time, then hit delete. I didn't need that reminder of betrayal. I had enough fuel in my conviction to carry me forward. The doors shut, and I walked away, certain of one thing. You don't fight rot with fire, you build something so strong it can't be burned down. I arrived at the HR office late morning, the hallway fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished linoleum in a way that made me feel as if I were walking down a corridor built entirely from glass shards. A broken reflection of the place I'd once called my second home. Barbara Kent was already at her desk, perched behind a mountain of paperwork, her usual professional composure tempered by a tightness in her jaw and a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. She wore a navy blazer that hadn't changed since I first met her years ago, with a name tag that read Barbara, a small symbol of permanence in an office defined by shifting numbers and shifting loyalties. I slid into the chair opposite her, the vinyl squeaking under my weight. She cleared her throat, her gaze flicking between me and the stack of forms she'd laid out. Forms that represented the end of my career at Summit Edge. Milo, she began quietly, I'm sorry this happened the way it did. She slid the first document toward me, severance agreement. The words felt foreign on her lips, like she was delivering a verdict she didn't want to pronounce. You qualify for 6 months of salary continuation, prorated benefits, and outplacement services. I nodded slowly and took the paper, skimming the legalese that spelled out every detail of my departure, the lump sum payment, the non-disparagement clause that forbidden me from speaking ill of the company, and the non-compete that silently threatened to keep me tethered to this city for another year. I set it aside and glanced at the next form. Release of claims. This one required me to waive any right to sue Summit Edge for wrongful termination or emotional distress. It was the catch-all that companies use to bury employees in a quagmire of legal obligations. Barbara watched me, her pen hovering over her notebook as if waiting for instructions. Finally, I picked up the email I'd taken a screenshot of, Danica's chilling directive, and slid it across the table. You saw this? I asked, voice measured. The moment I believed she had read it, her face fell, and a shadow passed over her features. Yes, she said, voice barely above a whisper. You didn't miss a single deadline during your bereavement leave, Milo. They approved your leave, and all your metrics were ahead of target. Her eyes darted away, then back at me, a flicker of frustration evident. This is bad. I leaned back, folding my arms. So, I'm told, I said. Barbara let out a sigh, flipping through the other forms. This is the non-disparagement clause. This is the confidentiality agreement, and this is the scope of your non-compete. She tapped the last page gently. They want you to keep confidentiality about anything you know from your time here, effectively silencing you from talking about the circumstances of your termination. I traced a fingertip along the line for my signature on the severance agreement. Signing these papers felt like scribbling my own obituary, a declaration that I was dead to the company. Yet, I refused to show hesitation. My father had taught me that if you wanted to know your worth, you had to stand for it. So I signed, each name a line etched with quiet defiance. Barbara stayed silent as I wrote my name, the pen moving steadily across the page, sealing my future in ink. When I placed the final form in front of her for her to date and countersign, she paused. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Did she want to resist this decision? Did she want to ask her superiors why they chose to discard someone who had delivered record-breaking growth? But the HR manual won over her instincts. She signed, stamping each document, then slid them back to me. The paper stack was heavier now, burdened with finality. I set the forms aside and pushed my chair back, rising to my full height. Anything else? I asked, my voice steady in spite of the churn in my gut. Barbara shook her head, but then, as I turned to leave, she called out softly, "Be careful, Milo. They'll try to sow seeds of doubt about you if you speak out. It's ugly." I paused at the door, turning back to face her. "Ugly is watching someone you trusted issue my death sentence by email," I said, my voice low but firm. "Ugly is seeing how quickly everyone falls in line when a single line of text is all it takes. But I'm not afraid of that." She offered a tremulous smile. "Just know that closing the door doesn't mean you have to burn the house down." I nodded, understanding her meaning. She believed in preserving dignity even in defeat. I gave a curt nod and stepped into the hallway, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat marking my departure. With every step, I could feel the weight of the non-compete clause tugging at me, trying to keep me anchored in the wreckage of this place. But I refused to be anchored. Out in the open air, I stopped at the lobby window and stared out at the Boise River glinting under the afternoon sun. My father's words echoed in my mind. "Son, let the current move. You just stay like the rock." I stood there, shoulders squared, absorbing the memory of his gravelly voice. That river had carved canyons and valleys over millennia, but the rocks remained, unyielding. I would be like that rock. I folded the final HR documents, placed them in my backpack, and slung it over my shoulder. Each page was a reminder of what had transpired, a proof of betrayal, and a ticket to a new future. I took one last look at the building. Summit Edge, with its gleaming logo and polished facade, looked like any other Fortune 500 company. But now I saw the cracks beneath the shine, the rot that could spread from a single decision gone wrong. I walked out of the building with my head held high. My heart wasn't light, but it was free. The non-compete clause might try to pin me to this city, but it couldn't cage my aspirations. I had proven my worth to the world, and a piece of paper signed by a compromised HR department wouldn't change that. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt something shift inside me, a resolve so fierce it warmed me from the inside out. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to Jerome. "Call me." He replied almost instantly with a thumbs-up emoji. I walked down the street, each step echoing against the buildings, the hum of traffic filling the void that Summit Edge had tried to leave in my life. My father's lessons guided me. Stay steady, stay true, and let the current move around you. Because this wasn't the end, it was just another beginning. 2 days had passed since I left Summit Edge, but my mind was still replaying Barbara's warning. Nothing will change. I had to prove her wrong. My phone buzzed that morning, a call from Harlan Pierce, CEO of Vertex Chain Freight. Harlan had a reputation for being a visionary, a man who saw potential where others saw only liabilities. I answered on the second ring. "Milo," his voice rumbled, "I've heard the rumors. Summit Edge let go of their highest-performing project lead while he was at his father's funeral. That takes a special kind of miscalculation." I could almost see his grin through the phone. "I've got a position for you. Division strategist. Full control. Name your conditions." My heart pounded as I leaned against the kitchen counter in my apartment, the Boise River reflections dancing on the window. I'd been half expecting a call like this, but hearing it was different. "Full control?" I asked, brow furrowing. "I want authority over my team's hiring and budgets. And one more thing. If anyone from my old team applies, give them a fair shot." I paused, listening to him consider. "You'll have it," he replied with a confidence that warmed something inside me. "Send them my way. I trust the judgment of the people who trust you." I hung up and exhaled, the tension easing from my shoulders. Harlan believed in what I'd built. He saw my team as an asset, not an obstacle. I stared out at the skyline, the sun glinting off the river like a promise, and felt a surge of optimism. This was what I'd been preparing for, an opportunity to not just rebuild, but to do it better, on my own terms. That afternoon, I sat with Jerome at a local cafe, the aroma of espresso mingling with the hum of casual conversations. He slid a freshly polished laptop across the table, fingers poised over the keyboard. "I've set up a shared drive," he said, voice low. "All our data, reports, and client contacts. We'll be ready to present to Vertex within hours." Everyone's eager. His eyes flicked to mine, a mix of excitement and gratitude reflecting in his gaze. We had a plan to bring the best of Summit Edge's project to Vertex, intact, vibrant, and unstoppable. I tapped a finger on the table, considering our next move. "We need to let them know we're serious," I said. "A formal proposal. Show them our metrics, our client retention, our projections. We built the spine of Summit Edge's operations. Vertex should see the value immediately." Jerome nodded, his long hair catching the light. I'll get Mira to finalize the data dashboards. Toby can rework the budgets and revenue forecasts. By the end of the day, we'll have something concrete. The next morning, I arrived at Vertex's gleaming headquarters, a contrast to the tense buzz I'd left behind. The lobby was sleek, with exposed brick walls wrapped in climbing vines and mid-century modern seating that invited collaboration. A receptionist greeted me with a nod. She already knew my name. I felt a level of respect here I hadn't seen at Summit Edge in years. Harlan met me in his office on the top floor, the large windows behind him revealing the city beneath like a tapestry. He extended his hand, and I felt the firm grip of a man used to making deals. "Welcome to Vertex," he said, his smile genuine. "I've read your proposal. Impressive. You and your team have delivered numbers that rival our strongest divisions. I want you to build us a new flagship department, a division that operates like a startup within the company." "Consider it done," I replied, confidence steady in my voice. He waved to an empty seat beside his desk, and I sat, pulling out my notes. First step, integrate my former team. I want to meet with each of them, evaluate their skills, and bring them on. No favoritism, no shortcuts. Just fair assessments and opportunities. Harlan leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. I admire that. Loyalty is worth more than any bottom line, but respecting talent is priceless. He clasped his hands. When can you start? Immediately, I said. We shook hands, sealing my transition from betrayal to possibility. As I left his office, exhilaration buzzed through me. I made my way to the newly assigned workspace, a corner of the floor with open-plan desks, whiteboards waiting for ideas, and the hum of potential in the air. Back at my apartment, I dialed my former team one by one. Hey, Mira, I said when her caller ID popped up. We met at the same cafe where I'd met Jerome. She slid a folder across the table, her eyes bright with resolve. Everything you need is here, she said. Our client rosters, analytics reports, even the contact lists. I scrubbed the data. Vertex's servers will be ready. I nodded, pride swelling. Good work. Let's make sure they know why they should hire you. Mira smiled, the tension of the past week easing in her posture. Toby came in next, his usual crisp white shirt replaced by a sweater that hinted at relaxed confidence. He handed me a thick binder. Budgets, projections, cost analyses. I forecasted our first quarter growth, and it's looking like a 40% increase from the previous year. I reviewed the numbers, impressed. This is solid, Toby. Harlan will love these figures. His grin was a rare sight. We're going to give him something he can't refuse. Jerome and Amani, our tech wizard, joined soon after, each with a folder of meticulously organized details, dashboard mock-ups, code snippets, integration plans. Within 24 hours, I had a meeting with Harlan and the rest of the executive team. I stood in front of a large screen in the conference room, clicking through slides that outlined our strategy, retention rates, revenue projections, client testimonials, and the cultural overhaul that had kept morale high during the turmoil. Everyone watched in silence, nodding at the cohesive presentation. When I finished, Harlan smiled and turned to the room. Our next division leaders, ladies and gentlemen, he declared proudly. What they've built at Summit Edge is remarkable, and now it's ours. The room erupted in applause. I felt a swell of emotion, relief, vindication, pride. My team and I had turned a wrongful termination into an opportunity. I caught Myra's eye, and she winked. We'd lived through betrayal, but now we were thriving. That night, I walked back to my apartment, the city lights flickering like constellations guiding me. I reflected on how 2 days ago, I was signing away my career under fluorescent lights that felt oppressive. Now, I had authority, a team I trusted, and a purpose that extended beyond any single company. I realized Harlan's approach was different. He saw value in people, not just profits. Before falling asleep, I texted my old friends and mentors. I'm back in the game. Their replies poured in, congratulations, pride, and questions about my experiences. I replied simply, stay steady. Better is coming. And it was. Because Vertex didn't miss. They saw potential when others only saw conflict. They believed in what we could build together. I drifted off knowing that when everything else rushed past, I'd remain steadfast, just like the rock my father had taught me to be. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the bar, the neon sign from inside casting a dim glow on the wet pavement. My phone still buzzed from the meeting I just left with Jerome, Toby, and Mira. We sat in a tucked-away bar near 8th Street, the kind of place where the booths were worn and the jukebox never stopped playing classic rock. We drank cheap beer, but the gravity of our situation made the atmosphere feel weightier than a fine whiskey. Jerome leaned forward, his elbow on the sticky table, eyes flicking to every corner of the dimly lit room. "Danika's trying to pull together your files," he muttered, voice low. "The New Point report is scrambled. Client calls are going to voicemail. Everyone's scared to touch anything." I stared into my glass, the amber liquid refracting the neon light. My mind ran through the possibilities. Danica still controlled Summit Edge's infrastructure. She could lock us out or delete our digital footprints. But I wasn't there anymore, and neither were 8 of my best people. "We expected that," I said. "We built redundancies for this." "Mira, did you get the backups off the server?" She nodded, her face pale but determined. "All of it. Newpoint, Wilson, Hernandez. Everything's on a secure drive in Vertex's cloud. Clients have full access. We lose nothing." Her calm confidence steadied the room. "If they erase a file, we restore it. If they change a record, we revert it. We're ready." Toby slammed his hand on the table, the sudden noise catching the attention of a couple at a nearby booth, but they quickly resumed their conversation. "Our numbers show Danica's scrambling," he said, voice tight. "Her email to the regional managers went out this morning. They're calling for status updates from us, but there's nothing to report because the team left. They're losing accounts. They'll drop further once clients see we've moved on." He shook his head, frustration etched into his features. "They thought firing you would send a message. Instead, they've created a void they can't fill." I took a slow sip, letting the words sink in. The empty desks we'd left behind were more than just vacant cubicles. They were symbols of a collective exodus, a statement of loyalty that transcended a paycheck. No one needed to ask who to blame. Danica's actions spoke louder than any advisory board meeting. "The storm's coming," I said, "and they'll be drowning in it. Meanwhile, we have to stay ahead of the wave. Thursday's client call with Hernandez. Are we ready?" Mira nodded, pulling her jacket tighter as the door to the bar slammed behind a late-arriving patron. "We've prepared a joint statement," she said, scrolling through her phone. "It's concise. Vertex Chain Freight now manages your account. We guarantee seamless transition. Your contacts remain the same. Thank you for your continued trust." It's cued to go out the moment we finalize their contracts. Jerome leaned back, folding his arms. "Harlan greenlit the contracts this morning. All signatures are in. We hit send, and they'll know exactly where to call." He flashed a grin that held both excitement and relief. We were moments away from flipping the script. What had started as a firing had turned into an opportunity to showcase the power of our collective commitment. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly midnight, the city around us settling into a quiet hum. "Let's do it," I said. "Send it." Toby tapped a few buttons on his phone, and within seconds, our announcement rippled through the digital networks. We watched as red receipts popped up, clients who had stared at their screens this afternoon, uncertain if they'd be abandoned, now seeing a clear path forward. The tension in the room shifted. We'd taken the initiative. We had control. Jerome raised his beer. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice warm. "And to Danica's empty desks." We toasted, but our celebration was tempered by the reality outside these walls. We weren't just celebrating our triumph. We were bracing for the cleanup that came after the storm. The next day, I'd be meeting with Harlan to iron out the final details. But for now, the night belonged to a small band of survivors who refused to let betrayal break them. Morning arrived with a pale, hesitant light piercing through the clouds. I barely slept, my mind drifting between the flared reports and the faces of clients who depended on our stability. I dressed quickly, avoiding the memories that lurked in my apartment. Photos of my father, framed desk plaques, well-worn books on leadership. I locked the door behind me and headed toward Vertex, each step a reminder that I no longer belonged to Summit Edge. The Vertex lobby was quiet, save for the hum of the digital ticker scrolling through freight rates. Security recognized me, opening the door with a nod. I climbed the glass staircase to my office on the 3rd floor, the indirect sunlight illuminating the sleek, modern space. My desk was pristine, waiting for me to fill it with the tools of our trade. A laptop humming softly, notepads stacked neatly, a whiteboard with highlighted goals for the quarter. I felt at home here in a way I never had at Summit Edge. I fired up my computer and saw the first signs of movement. Emails from clients acknowledging our message, some expressing gratitude, others asking questions about next steps. I responded swiftly, setting up calls, assigning Jerome to lead strategy sessions, and tapping Mira to finalize integration plans. The hum of productivity buzzed through my fingers as I typed. By mid-afternoon, I received a notification. Summit Edge had posted an internal announcement claiming staff shortages due to unforeseen circumstances and assuring clients that project continuity remains our top priority. The statement was a thinly veiled attempt to downplay our departure. I smirked. Their words rang hollow when their empty desk spoke volumes. I forwarded the announcement to my team with a single comment: prepare responses. Soon after, the phones began to ring. Clients called our new hotline, seeking confirmation, reassurance, details on timelines. We answered, empathetic but confident, guiding them through the transition. Each call strengthened our foothold. Each question answered with clarity chipped away at Summit Edge's credibility. By early evening, we'd secured 2 verbal commitments from major clients, ready to sign formal agreements the next day. As the sun dipped low, I walked down the corridor to find Harlan waiting outside his office. His expression was calm but eager. "I heard good things," he said, extending a folder. Inside were signed contracts, Wilson account, Hernandez account, and a new partnership with a West Coast distributor who had been on the fence at Summit Edge. I felt a wave of satisfaction. "They signed?" I asked, disbelief mingling with triumph. Harlan nodded. "They've been waiting for stability. And you gave them that." We sat in his office, reviewing the numbers. The room felt electric with possibility. "You and your team have done more in 2 days than they did in weeks," he remarked. "I want to make sure you get the resources you need for Q3. We're moving your operation into the penthouse suite of this building, floor-to-ceiling windows, dedicated servers, the works. Consider it done." I closed the folder, feeling a surreal sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Harlan. But this isn't just about resources. It's about trust, between us and the clients." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "You've earned every ounce of it." That evening, I walked back to my apartment with the city lights shimmering like stars at my feet. The weight of what we'd accomplished settled in my chest, a mix of pride and relief. I stopped at the edge of the Boise River, where the current whispered over the rocks. The water was darker now, reflecting the streetlights, but I saw my reflection staring back, steady, unbroken. I thought about how this journey began with a cold email, how betrayal had threatened to consume us, and how we'd turned that storm into wind at our backs. My phone buzzed with messages: congratulations, thanks, excitement for the road ahead. I replied with an anchor emoji, the symbol I'd chosen for our new division, a reminder that we would remain steadfast no matter how fierce the storm. As I stood there, listening to the river's steady murmur, I felt a deep sense of peace. The empty desks at Summit Edge were no longer symbols of loss. They'd become monuments to our resilience. I took a deep breath, tight with resolve, and walked home, knowing the storm had passed, but the current would always be moving. I would stay like the rock, and I would forge something stronger on the other side. Saturday dawned cool and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing behind the scenes. I woke early, the familiar tension in my chest reminding me that this wasn't a weekend for rest. After showering, I dressed in jeans and a worn plaid shirt, comfort clothes for war rooms, not boardrooms. My phone buzzed with messages, one from Mira confirming a final audit of our confidential client database, another from Toby with updated projections for Vertex's Q3 revenue. I responded with "almost there," then checked my email. 7 applications from former team members sat in my inbox, each one a testament to loyalty forged in the fires of betrayal. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming by my side, and opened the first resume, Jerome's. His cover letter was simple: "I'd like to continue building under your leadership." I smiled, remembering our late-night strategy sessions and the battles we fought together at Summit Edge. A text popped up from Jerome. "Coffee at the usual spot in 10?" I replied, "Be there." I knew this moment meant more than a job. It was a vote of confidence that I couldn't take lightly. At our corner cafe, I found Jerome already waiting, cradling a mug of black coffee like it was Lifeline. He stood as I approached, offering a fist bump. "Milo," he said quietly, pulling out a manila folder. Inside were his certifications, a letter of recommendation from a client, and an outline of strategies he drafted for Vertex. His eyes were bright, resolute. "I'm in," he said. I nodded, emotions twisting in my throat as I recognized the depth of his commitment. "Glad to have you," I replied. We clasped hands, sealing a pact forged in midnight labors and mutual respect. The rest arrived in a steady stream, Mira with her analytics background sharpened even further, Toby with his finance acumen polished by weeks of budget realignments, Amani with her tech wizardry ready to deploy new dashboards. Two others, Paul and Nalani, joined us, mid-level managers who'd worked under my guidance, each with their own collection of experience and a shared sense of urgency. They carried coffee in their hands and determination in their eyes. We gathered around a small table, laptops open, outlines spread out like battle plans. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice low but clear. Vertex has green-lit our division. They've approved budgets, resources, and a mandate to transform. But it starts with you. I need you to fill out your paperwork today, hiring packets, non-disclosure agreements, everything. We need your start dates to be official by Monday. Their nods were uniform, a silent vow to stand by me through the tumult. Our clients are expecting continuity, not excuses, I continued. We're going to hit the ground running, showing them why they stuck with us. We spent the next 2 hours working in tandem. Jerome and Amani set up secure channels for file transfers, ensuring that sensitive data remained protected. Mira began mapping out client communication plans, her fingers flying over the screen as she drafted emails. Toby ran numbers for a 5-year forecast, his lips pursed in concentration. Paul and Nalani organized training schedules, determined to integrate the newcomers seamlessly. I felt a swell of pride as I watched them collaborate, each person bringing a unique talent to the table. This was why leadership mattered, not for titles, but for the sparks that lit under pressure. That afternoon, I met with Tate Olvera, a labor attorney I'd consulted the previous Sunday. He practiced out of a small office downtown, walls lined with framed law degrees and a handwritten quote, "Justice delayed is justice denied." I sat across from him, the sun streaming through the blinds, casting stripes across the desk. He reviewed the non-compete clause I'd signed, his brow furrowing. "This smells like wrongful termination and malicious intent," he said, tapping the clause. "Vertex can probably challenge this if they want, but you said you're not suing." I leaned back, feeling the tension ease. "I just wanted to make sure I'm clear to move on. I'm not here to litigate history. I'm here to build a future." Tate nodded, his expression approving. "Then you're free." With legal clearance in hand, I returned to Vertex, walking through the glass doors feeling lighter than I had in weeks. My team was in the war room, a conference area with whiteboards on every wall and sticky notes plastered with client names and project milestones. They looked up as I entered, eyes hopeful. "All set," I said, holding up the signed legal opinion. The relief in the room was palpable. I could almost see the weight lift from their shoulders. We turned our focus to outreach. By evening, we had scheduled introductory meetings with 3 major clients, the Wilson account, Hernandez contract, and the West Coast distributor who'd sat on the fence. Each of us took responsibility for a client, preparing personalized communication that underscored our commitment and our fresh start. I crafted a message that balanced humility with confidence. We acknowledged the upheaval, congratulated them on their resilience, and promised a seamless transition under Vertex's banner. Late into the evening, as the city lights blinked on outside the penthouse suite, we rehearsed our talking points. Amani tested the new dashboard on the projection screen, its colorful graphs and real-time analytics reflecting the possibilities we could already imagine. Mira reviewed the campaign drafts, and Toby fine-tuned the financial models. We joked about metrics and milestones, laughter breaking through the seriousness of our mission. For a moment, it felt like we were back at Summit Edge, but this time with a new chapter waiting to be written. At midnight, we finished our preparations. I gathered everyone in a circle, the glow of the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind us. "I know it hasn't been easy," I began, voice steady. "We left behind more than an office. We left behind betrayal, doubt, and fear. But here, right now, we're building something stronger. We're not just surviving this storm, we're using it to power us forward." Their nods and murmurs of agreement filled the room with a warmth that chased away the chill of Saturday night. As I walked home later, the air was cool against my face, and the distant hum of traffic mingled with the breeze. I thought back to the day I opened Danica's email, the shattered shock that had nearly taken hold of me. Now, surrounded by 7 of my best people, I felt anchored, ready to face whatever currents lay ahead. Our applications were more than just forms. They were declarations of trust, loyalty, and shared purpose. Before going to sleep, I placed a small stone on my windowsill, the one my father had given me years ago, smooth and worn from summers by the river. I whispered a silent promise. I would remain steady, no matter how fast the world moved. And with that, I drifted into a dream where the river flowed clear and unbroken, carrying me toward whatever lay beyond the bend. The ripple started quietly Monday night. An anxious whisper in the hallways of Summit Edge, a subtle tremor that no one saw coming until it was too late. I had just sat down to dinner at home, the Boise skyline glowing in the distance, when my phone buzzed. My hand trembled slightly as I read the text from Mira, Wilson account off the books. We've got movement. I glanced at the clock, 7:34 p.m. Too late for normal business hours, but in the world of freight and finance, contracts never truly slept. I excused myself and stepped onto the balcony, the cool air brushing against my skin. I dialed Harlan's number, imagining the tension in his office across town. He answered immediately, his voice low and focused. "It's happening," I said, leaning against the railing. Wilson signed on the dotted line with Vertex. He exhaled. "That's huge. What about Hernandez?" I tapped a finger on the balcony ledge. "They finalized their paperwork this afternoon, and news just reached me. Hernandez's department had called to confirm our arrangement. They're moving their shipments next week." I could almost hear Harlan's grin through the phone. "Outstanding. And the board at Summit Edge?" Barbara's HR message, Danica placed on indefinite leave. "They're trying to spin it as an audit of leadership practices, but everyone knows it's because they lost 2 major accounts in 1 week." I paused, letting the gravity settle. "Their collapse is underway." Harlan's tone hardened. "Don't let up. Q4's coming, and we need to keep pushing. Cement our reputation as the division that never falters." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Understood. I'll rally the team." We hung up, and I exhaled, the air hissing as it left my lungs. The moment was surreal. A year ago, I'd been coasting on deadlines and old promises. Now, I was orchestrating the downfall of a company that had once cast me aside. I slipped back inside and gathered my laptop. On the screen, data scrolled like a ticker, clients transitioning, contracts expiring, projections confirming our trajectory. I fired off a secure message to my team. "Meet at Vertex at 8 a.m. We'll discuss next steps. Stay strong." The responses pinged back within seconds. Thumbs up emojis, exclamation points, one simple, "Let's go." Their energy propelled me forward. That night, sleep evaded me. I pored over spreadsheets, refining Q4 targets and adjusting forecasts to reflect our recent wins. The room felt like a war room, every chart a weapon, every client call a battle plan. Out the window, the city lights shimmered like a roadmap, guiding my thoughts toward tomorrow. Morning arrived with an electric bus. I arrived at Vertex early, the lobby calm but charged. Security nodded as I passed, a silent acknowledgement of my presence here, a tacit reminder of how far I'd come. In the conference room, the team was already gathered. Jerome, Mira, Toby, Amani, Paul, Nalani, and 2 new hires we'd secured earlier that week. Each face reflected fierce determination. I stood at the head of the table, sliding my laptop open. "We knew this moment was coming," I began, voice steady. "Summit Edge is collapsing. Danica's gone, and clients are fleeing. But we're not here to gloat. We're here to solidify our future. The next quarter is ours to lose." Eyes flicked around the room. Some were tense, others bright with anticipation. "We have contracts signed and in the pipeline. Wilson, Hernandez, West Coast. Our task now is to exceed expectations, deliver on every promise, every shipment, every call." Jerome leaned forward. "I've got teams ready to handle Wilson's logistics. We'll meet their Monday deadline. Amani's finalizing the integration of their tracking systems. We'll be seamless." He clicked a remote, and a live dashboard flickered on the screen. Shipment statuses, route optimizations, client feedback streams. The tech was a symphony of code and data, humming in harmony. Mira took over, outlining the communication strategy. "We need targeted outreach, weekly check-ins, performance reports, personalized updates. Clients need to see that we're proactive, not reactive. We've already scheduled introductory calls for tomorrow." She displayed a calendar grid filled with color-coded entries, each client touchpoint planned like a chess move. Toby adjusted his glasses, pulling up a projected revenue model. "Our projections for Q4 just increased by 20%. We need to revisit resource allocations, ensure we have enough trucks, staff, and warehouse space. I've already spoken to our vendor partners. They can scale with us." He flicked through budget lines and cost analyses, highlighting areas where we could cut overhead without sacrificing quality. I absorbed their updates, feeling the momentum build. "Excellent work. Amani, coordinate with Jerome's logistics teams to finalize the Wilson rollout. Mira, ensure our communication templates are dynamic, tailor them to each client's needs. Toby, confirm vendor agreements and finalize Q4 budget allocations by noon. Paul and Nalani, oversee the onboarding of the West Coast distributor. They need a dedicated contact person. Their nods were crisp, precise, each committed to their role. By lunchtime, the atmosphere felt electric, like we were riding a wave of inevitability. I stepped out onto the balcony for a breath of fresh air, the mid-afternoon sun warming my face. The Boise River in the distance sparkled like a promise. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift to my father's lessons. Be the rock, son. Let the current move around you. The current was shifting for me, sweeping away the wreckage of Summit Edge. I would remain unshaken. Back inside, I convened a quick huddle. Remember, we're not just taking clients. We're earning a reputation as the team that delivers when others can't. If Summit Edge is the cautionary tale, we'll be the blueprint. Jerome grinned, and the rest of the team echoed his resolve. We returned to our tasks, the hum of productivity swelling. Afternoon rains began, dark clouds scuttling across the sky, mirroring the turmoil back at Summit Edge. Danica's email had morphed into an apology memo, nothing more than sales pitch to retain clinging clients. But each message only underscored the collapse: empty desks, frozen phone lines, scrambling internal teams. Meanwhile, at Vertex, our phones rang nonstop: contract signings, billing confirmations, logistical inquiries. We answered each call, offering assurance, clarity, solutions. By the end of the day, we'd finalized a new partnership with a Midwest shipping consortium, an account Summit Edge had never pursued due to risk aversion. With resources flowing and confidence high, the consortium saw advantage in our aggressive approach. I sent out a company-wide announcement. We're expanding into the Midwest. Effective immediately, we'll establish a new logistics hub in Omaha. Congratulations to the team for making this possible. The congratulatory messages flooded in, internal cheers and external client kudos. That evening, I returned home, feeling the kind of fatigue that comes from hard-won victories. I sat by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, transforming the city lights into shimmering prisms. On my desk lay the email that had ignited this journey, Danica's cold sentence delivered at my father's funeral. It felt like a relic from another life, a specter I'd vanquished. I took a sip of coffee, strong and black, and reflected on our trajectory. Each challenge had sharpened us. Each betrayal had steeled our resolve. Summit Edge's collapse was more than just a victory. It was a lesson in leadership, loyalty, and resilience. I thought of my father's final words: "Son, life will knock you down, but the rock stays." I placed my hand on the smooth stone he'd given me, tracing its contours. The current had brought me here, but I had remained steadfast. As night settled, I drafted an email to Barbara from HR, congratulating her on the board's decision and expressing my hope that Summit Edge's future might be brighter with lessons learned. I didn't expect a response, but writing it felt right: closure through grace, not vengeance. I turned off my laptop and looked once more at the river, its waters continuing their endless flow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more clients, bigger targets, deeper responsibilities. But as long as I stayed like the rock, I was ready for whatever came. I turned away from the window, closing the chapter on Summit Edge's demise and stepping into a future shaped by the storms we'd weathered and the strength we'd found together. 3 months after we'd picked up the pieces and set sail under Vertex's banner, I found myself in an office space that felt more like a home than anything I'd known before. Each morning, the sunlight slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting gold on the desks where Jerome, Mira, Toby, Amani, Paul, and Nalani already sat, heads bent over monitors as clients' dashboards flickered to life. I paused at the entrance to watch them work, Jerome directing a logistics reroute for a new Midwest hub, Mira tweaking a personalized client communique, Toby recalibrating our Q1 forecasts, Amani fine-tuning the analytics that predicted trends in real time. Their faces radiated a confidence I recognized as belonging not to me alone but to the network of trust we'd built. We'd crushed every forecast. 35% growth in 2 months, 2 industry awards, innovation in supply chain, and excellence in client retention. And 4 new major clients, including 3 who'd walked away from Summit Edge citing we were the only team they trusted after the collapse. The statistics followed me everywhere: on the screensaver of my phone, in the celebratory banner in the lobby, in the congratulatory notes from Harlan that landed in my inbox like a steady drumbeat of pride. I'd learned to temper my satisfaction with humility. Success could flicker out as quickly as it had flickered in at Summit Edge, but for now, I let myself feel the warmth of accomplishment. That Friday, as the sun dropped low, I walked into my office to find a cake waiting on my desk. It was simple: buttercream frosting, Happy Defection Day written in precise blue icing, and a single candle that felt almost ceremonious. I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out with a hidden camera. Instead, my old crew filed in, beaming. Jerome passed me a slice, Mira handed me a coffee, and Toby tapped the cake plate with a plastic fork. "We wouldn't have made it without you," he said softly. "We all signed up to follow you." Their words landed deep, reminding me why I'd chosen to build rather than burn bridges. Harlan appeared in the doorway, his tailored suit cutting a sharp figure against the warm glow of the setting sun. He wore that serious expression that creases his forehead, but his eyes shone with something I recognized as approval. "You've made this division the crown jewel, Milo," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Expect a promotion soon." I offered him a slice of cake. He declined but smiled, that rare curve of his lips telling me the confidence he placed in our work. Later that evening, I sat at my balcony, the Boise River shimmering in the lamplight. My phone buzzed with a message from Barbara Kent: Summit Edge being acquired. Danica blacklisted. You won. I stared at the words, letting them settle in like a final punctuation. I thought about the long journey from that cold email to this moment. How I'd refused to let betrayal define me, how I'd stayed like the rock while everything rushed past. I tapped out a reply. "Thanks for letting me know." Onward. Below me, the city lights twinkled, and I felt a contentment that wasn't rooted in victory but in the knowledge that I'd honored my father's legacy. I remained steady, letting the current move around me, and in doing so, I discovered what true leadership meant: resilience, respect, and the indelible power of loyalty. 1 year after Dad's funeral, I stood on the bank of the Boise River before dawn, the water rushing silently beneath a sky still heavy with night. The air was cold, sharp enough to pull my breath into my lungs with a sting. I tightened my coat around my shoulders. I was tracing the current as it carved its path around unmoving rocks, just as Dad had taught me: stay like the rock. Let the current move around you. I closed my eyes, feeling echoes of everything that had happened since that morning 8 months ago when Danica's email had shattered my world. Losing my job, scrubbing backup files, rallying a team, outpacing Summit Edge, building Vertex's premier division, and finally watching the company that had discarded us crumble under its own miscalculations. Each moment had been a tumbling eddy. But I had stayed solid, unshaken. Now I felt different under this sky. The ache left by Dad's absence remained, but beneath it was something new, a steady confidence that came from knowing I had survived storms more vicious than any forecast. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another message from Harlan. New division charter approved. Your leadership is legacy. I smiled, picturing his stoic face breaking into an almost rare grin. I typed a quick reply. Thank you. Let's keep pushing. Even as far as I'd come, the work was never truly done. Success could not be a destination. It was a constant commitment to staying true to what Dad had taught me. Integrity first, loyalty always, and never letting rage at betrayal become the engine of your decisions. I pocketed my phone and looked downstream, where the first pale light of morning shimmered on the water. I thought of Jerome, Mira, Toby, Amani, Paul, and Nalani, the crew who'd refused to let me face that cold email alone and had followed me through each upheaval. They'd transformed unexpected termination into an opportunity to build something better, and together we'd crafted a workplace where people came before profit, where our bosses valued voices as much as numbers. Danica had called me for a reaction, but she never understood that people weren't cogs. They were the very foundation of any enterprise that claimed to lead. She tried to measure loyalty by rigid metrics. We measured it by the perseverance of shared purpose. Ahead of me lay a new horizon, forging a corporate culture that carried forward my father's lessons beyond my own tenure. Vertex had pledged resources to expand our division nationally, to innovate in ways that no other freight company dared to imagine. As we prepared to open our third regional hub, I knew success would hinge on remaining humble. The river didn't boast of its journey. It simply kept flowing, powerful yet unobtrusive. I would emulate that flow, steady, unassuming, relentless. When the first orange sliver of sun peaked above the horizon, I dipped my hand into the cold stream, feeling the current slip around my fingers. The rock remained, unmoved beneath the water's relentless push. I felt that strength surge inside me. I took a deep breath and turned toward the city, each step away from the riverbank a commitment to lead with grace rather than anger, to build rather than destroy. Dad's legacy wasn't buried in the ground. It was alive in every choice I made. Steady as the rock, I walked home to a world I'd remade and a future I was ready to shape.